Werner Stengg, welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. Congratulations on your new book. And while discussing various aspects of the evolution of European digital policy, I propose to start this conversation with having a look at the motivation in your book and its structure and the key messages, key outputs.
Yeah, first of all, many thanks for having me. Great pleasure to talk about my book, which actually at the origin of this book was groups of students coming to see the commission. There was often visiting groups coming from all different types of society and economy. There was a room filled with students, and I was supposed to speak about what it takes to make Europe fit for the digital age, which is exactly the working title of my current boss, so Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager of the European Commission. So that's her mandate, and I was supposed to help her during those 5 years make Europe fit for the digital age. And then you've got a room filled with 20-year-olds that were all born into the digital world as we know it. And they don't have this sort of the comparison to the world before digital. So when I had 1 hour to talk to them what it means actually to make Europe fit for the digital age, or what Europe's digital policy is all about. And then I realized I cannot start with the solutions, presenting them all types of laws and policies without having explained the problem. Now, if you start explaining the problems, then you come to the origin of the internet almost. You go back in time, and that's what I did with those students. I said, listen, guys, when I came to Brussels in 1996, there was hardly any internet as we know it today. There was no search, there was no mobile phones, there was no platforms, there was no Google, there was no social media. And then sort of I explained to them the good and the bad things that digitization brought to all of us, as citizens, as consumers, as businesses, as societies. And then at long last, I came then with the gradual solutions that we found to challenges policy-wise, right? From the general data protection regulation to the modernization of consumer protection laws, to the first instances of platform policy. And then at long last, probably 5 minutes before these guys left the room, I had at last arrived at the core of the presentation, which was sort of all the tech policy measures taken in the last few years. But in the book actually follows exactly the same logic. So I am describing the evolution of the digital world as we have witnessed it in the last 25 years. I then describe gradually how digital policy has sort of tried to do justice to those developments, analyze, of course, in great depth all the problems from market power to disinformation to dependencies, all sorts of problems that are associated with the digitization. And then I'm explaining, obviously, the various legal instruments that we have come up with to address those problems. But then also in the last chapter, I'm also taking a more industrial policy point of view, because it's not just about regulating technology. It's also Europe wants to be strong in digital technologies. So it's also this part, what have we done to promote innovation and investment in Europe in a geopolitical environment which has become very, very complex in the last few years, as you know.
And this would be among the central issues of today's conversation. But before this, the last topic, but before moving into it, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that Europe and any polity, actually, particularly of this kind of top tier, has plethora of different ways to regulate and different areas to regulate. And what we see that it's getting more and more technical, or we become less and less focused, or narrower and narrower focused on a specific aspect or specific policy, discovering this microcosm inside a specific regulation. But there must be some place in this regulatory hierarchy where you have to have a broader picture and see how different policies interact and how they support, inform each other, make each other stronger, and maybe also conflict with one another. You probably sit somewhere where you have this broader vision and broader understanding. Without maybe asking you to delve into details and explain specificities in this specific question, Do you see that all in all, we are moving, these policies can be consolidated or they don't have to be consolidated in full? What's the interaction and how do they coexist?
That's an excellent question. And again, you will find it reflected in the structure of my book. Because when I come sort of to policy making in response to the digital transformation, I distinguish between the period from 2000 to 2019, which was exactly when this current commission took office, the von der Leyen Commission. And I call this point sort of the paradigm shift. Because first, in those first, if you want, 20 years, we were very reactive as policymakers, societies. Of course, these were all new technologies. Nobody has seen this stuff before. Nobody could possibly anticipate, go back 25 years in time. And nobody could have dreamed of the world in which we live today. And I'm not even talking about artificial intelligence, but I'm just talking about the platform economy and the Googles and Facebooks and Apples of this world, and how this has changed everything we do on a daily basis. So therefore, also policymaking was very cautious, not knowing what to deal with and how to deal with this and whether to deal with this in the first place, because the disadvantages, the downsides only, of course, came over time and were, as I said, hard to anticipate. So it was a very reactive, passive form, and whenever a problem popped up, there was an attempt to solve this problem and then solve another problem and see, okay, well, e-commerce is held back by the fact that people don't trust in this online channel. And what if things go wrong? And what if the goods that I've ordered are not good? And can I return them? And will my credit card be hacked? And so on. So therefore, one had to say, okay, hang on. The good old consumer laws are not fit for purpose. We need somehow adapt them to this new online world. But it was always adaptive, reactive, one step behind, right? And then at the beginning of this mandate, when von der Leyen indeed made, as I said before, this Europe fit for the digital age a priority, it was one of the 6 big priorities of this commission. This was a paradigm shift in that all of a sudden we developed an overarching strategy towards digitization. Exactly sort of this helicopter view that you are referring to, that we looked sort of at the status quo and we said, where are we today? Where are we today, both in terms of our own capabilities as Europe in terms of digital technologies, knowing that this is the future, of course, of our competitiveness, of our resilience, of our all sorts of things. So that was the first analysis. Where do we need to go in terms of industrial policy, green policy, digital policy? On the other hand, what are the problems out there that need to be addressed in a coherent and comprehensive way? And that, of course, again, comes back to the trustworthy use of technologies. That was our umbrella under which you can subsume most of the digital laws that you have witnessed in the last few years. We said technology, digital technology in itself, like any technology, is not good or bad. It's not AI is not bad, it depends on what you use it for and how you use it. And the same applies to all other technologies. So we said we want to use technology. So our regulatory agenda is not anti-tech, if you want. Yeah, we did not say, oh my God, the digital world is so dangerous and so terrible. We must go back to where we were 20 years ago. We said, no, we want to embrace, we want to use technology, we want to develop technology in Europe, but always with this human-centric perspective in mind, that it serves people, that it serves companies, that it serves society. And this is a bit, if you go, we can then discuss whatever you want, law by law or area by area, but that was always the guiding principle. What are the guardrails that we need for technology to be developed and used in Europe in a way that is in tune with our values?
And would this feature be the key element of Europe's digital decade and European vision about the digital challenges and opportunities? Should we is it the overarching mission just to make these technologies more human-centered? It's kind of digital renaissance, essentially. Is this the topical, the main strategic objective of this policy, or should we also look at the players themselves? Should we recalibrate the structure of the digital markets? Should we ask, should we just make the current gatekeepers be more accountable and more mindful of all the risks that the usage of them can bring to all of us? Or should Europe also try to maybe facilitate the emergence and scaling up of some alternatives with European embeddedness or some residence in European member states?
It is both. And the two aspects are actually closely interrelated. Of course, you refer to the digital decade 2030, which is actually the title that we gave to our strategy, to the more investment type of strategy that we came up with. Now, with all the member states and with the parliament, we said, where do we want to be as Europe in terms of digital capabilities? So that's really sort of this technology building, promoting element where we said, well, we need high-class digital infrastructures from connectivity to AI to cloud capabilities to supercomputing powers, quantum computing, enough microprocessors and so on. So all the sort of the ingredients that European companies need and will need to thrive in this digital economy, if you want, right? At the same time, also we came with sort of the Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles, which is more the value part of this, yeah, where we said, well, as I said before, all of these technologies need to be developed in a way that is good for society, because otherwise, what's the point in doing so? Not every innovation is good for society, right? There's also bad innovation. So we want to innovate, but we want good innovation in simple terms. Now, the regulation of the existing platforms and players of the digital world, let's call them big tech, obviously, that was, of course, part and parcel of it. On the one hand, we needed to regulate those to make them more accountable, as you said yourself, because that is part of the observation at the beginning of this mandate, that we have lost democratic control over activities that affect all of us. So we have, in a way, privatized many things that determine everyday life of our businesses and citizens. It's in the hands of Google to decide whether any European startup has a fair chance of being successful, right? So this is not regulation that stifles innovation. So that's why I said before, it's not either or. So if we regulate the digital world, it's also to bring greater fairness into it, greater openness, more opportunities for everyone. So that if there is this wonderful Belgian, Austrian, or whatever startup, that they are not immediately killed by one of the big tech, that they're not immediately bought probably, that they are not kept away from their consumers because the platforms hold the key to consumers, right? And they all do this, of course, in a way that suits their own purposes. That's fine. These are companies. They want to maximize their profits. But this is not aligned with the public interest. If this information circulates on Meta, that obviously increases their advertising income. But it is bad for society. So we try to make sure that what is out there already acts more responsibly, opens opportunities for everyone, citizens and companies alike. But at the same time, this also a bit reestablishes the playing field, the level playing field for other companies. So that's why I'm saying it's not investment or regulation. We try to regulate in a way that makes innovation in Europe possible as well.
Okay, just staying on this thing. I imagine there could be two visions about the coexistence of the intentions of Europe to become more ready for the digital challenges and opportunities, and the current big tech, which sit on the largest channels of communication and shape them and prepare for us in the micro, on the nano level, in the individual level, this in the targeted way. One would be to follow the logic of coexistence between competition law and privacy, where basically we hear more and more often the message, don't ask us how we earned our first billion. We know that privacy is now important, and they obviously use it opportunistically in a cunning way, but they kind of say that we will be one-stop shop, we will protect your privacy, we design better products, we will filter you out of all these third parties who are smaller, much more maverick, and we will be quasi-public utilities. We see some movement towards this becoming a new standard of conduct. And this, from the perspective of competition law or of competition mind, it somehow reaffirms the status quo, because it only makes them stronger by making more accountable and embedded into the mainstream discourse and mainstream political agenda, and becoming part and parcel of our routine. And another vision is to say that it's kind of a second best option for Europe not to have the big tech from other jurisdictions be acting in an accountable way, acting in a kind of way which acknowledges the specificity of Europe. Okay, you are a little bit too focused on human rights, we will comply. And another vision that we have to somehow replace, however caricaturistic and unrealistic and utopian this vision is, that Europe needs its own big tech. So do you think that these two are in some conflict, these two approaches?
Well, in this world, everything is in conflict with everything. I mean, it's a very banal statement, but when you do digital policy at this level that we have done in Europe in the past mandate, there are trade-offs all over the place. There are balances to be struck each and every time. It is crazy because there is no win-win-win policy where you get it all. You know, you get safety and you get fair competition and you get this, that, and the other, and full accountability and what have you. You always have to sacrifice something for something or someone for someone. This is policy making and lawmaking in general, and it applies even more here. Just one example linked to what you said. When we regulated market power of big tech with the so-called Digital Markets Act, this was exactly the starting point was, as you said, sort of they almost become public utilities in a way, because everybody needs them, uses them, depends on them. And so therefore, there is no way to either compete with them because they're too strong, nor avoid them because you need them. Now we said this can't be because they are not public utilities. They don't act in the public interest. This is not aligned. What they do, as I said before, is not aligned with the public interest. So therefore, we had to intervene, but every intervention comes at a cost. So if we now force big tech, as we do in the DMA, to open up their services to competitors, to other users, this comes sometimes at the price that they may say, well, if you really force me to do this and to allow me other app stores and apps on my iPhone, this will compromise privacy and cybersecurity and what have you. Partially, that's not true. And it's just arguments sort of to avoid changes to your business models. But there's, of course, also a grain of truth in it. Yeah. So you always have to see, okay, what are the downsides of it? But if you then at the end of the day feel that this is the right thing to do, because just to lean back and say, oh, well, we hope that big tech will take care of us all, you know, while it makes them richer every day. We blindly trust that they have societal interest in mind, which they don't, right? So we said, okay, we have to respect some negative consequences. When we acted on the AI Act, to give another example, the new requirements under the AI Act have led to a situation that some of the platforms are not training their models in Europe anymore. So their large language models in Europe anymore for legal uncertainty and a fear that they would be compromising copyright or whatever other law. Now, some people are saying, oh my God, this is bad for Europe's competitiveness because now they are not training their models in Europe anymore, so they won't be so well adapted to the European environment. So what? Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to make a choice in the public interest and say, well, if they do not respect our laws and values, then they shouldn't do it here and someone else can and will. And this is probably which also opens, of course, the opportunity for European tech to develop. If those are more willing and ready to respect our rules, they also have now a much more single market than ever before, because all the laws we're discussing here now are regulations that apply immediately and directly all over Europe. This is one of the reasons why we did those laws. If I think back on the AI Act 5 years ago, we discussed amongst ourselves, do we need a law and why and what for? Then one of the main reasons was we don't want fragmentation all over Europe, because it was already 5 years ago clear that AI has the potential of being quite disruptive, not as much as we know today, but still. And they were very afraid that the Germans and then the French and then the Austrians and then whoever comes up with their own national responses. So we said, no, 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 hold on. We will try to make a European-wide framework, proportionate, risk-based, but then a European startup scale up can actually then, complying with this law, access 450 million consumers in Europe, right? So we can't artificially create European digital champions. You said utopian. Of course we can't, yeah. It's still the market, it's still the consumer that decides, do they want to Google something, or can we turn them to a European search engines, which we label as, oh my God, this is super high value ethical search engine, the European way. Consumers will say, get lost. As long as they get better service from Google, I go to Google. Or I want my iPhone and I love Apple. You know, so we cannot tell people what they should like. We can just create framework conditions that facilitates the development and the growth of European tech companies.
But in your understanding of the world, of how the constellation should exist, is it can Europe continue playing in the top tier in this kind of geo-economic, geopolitical in the future, in the following decades, without having their own big tech, leaving aside the impossibility actually, which is kind of dilemmatic situation. But is it necessary, or we will be able to continue on this impressive trajectory against other geo-economic superpowers in the following years without declining and being able to offer something else?
I don't know whether we need big tech. We definitely need tech. I don't know whether we need big tech companies the way we know them today. First of all, it's true that the geopolitical environment has changed immensely in the last few years. So when we did our wonderful strategy 5 years ago, we already spoke about technological sovereignty for Europe and all sorts of things. But this was before COVID. This was before the war in Ukraine. This was about many other the crises that we have seen. This was before China really became as strong and invasive as they are today. This was before Putin attacked Europe with cyber attacks every day. So it was a different planet still even 5 years ago. And today, there is no alternative to Europe becoming stronger, more independent, more resilient in our digital economy, right? So we have to do this. We also, by the way, don't have to do it alone, because the new paradigm in a way is we act together with like-minded nations across the globe, right? So because it's not just Europe needs to have now its own companies for everything and produce every microprocessor ourselves and do this ourselves and that ourselves. We don't have the resources for this. It's not possible. We need to stay involved in a global economy. Our wealth as Europe comes from our strength as an exporting continent. So we cannot just say, let's close our borders. We do everything in-house, even if it's highly inefficient, economically speaking. So we are trying to become stronger. We are working closely with our like-minded, with the Americans, with the Canadians, with the Australians, with the South Koreans, with the Japanese. There's lots of like-minded who are all a bit in the same boat as we are. And it's more sort of the like-minded, and you have China, and then you have Russia. And in this geopolitical mix, obviously, Europe needs to become stronger. Does that require copy-pasting existing business models? I would argue against that. First of all, who are those big tech, and why have they become big tech? These were really the consumer-facing platforms, right? This is really sort of this intermediation between any type of business offering any type of service, product, or information, and us, consumers, citizens, users. And by obviously exploiting the value of the data that we were feeding them with, they have become as strong as they are. Now, again, if any European company comes up with a business model that is more convincing, be my guest, wonderful, would be great. But what our digital strategy rather is, it connects digital strategy with industrial strategy. It starts where Europe is actually strong. So it is not starting out of a weak position. Oh my God, we have no Google. Let's try to invent a Google and hope our best that it will work. We're saying, no, 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 no. Europe has always been strong in industry. And quite advanced industries, yeah, not talking about old-fashioned industry, advanced industries, which are increasingly using technology, data, AI, and so on to become even more competitive, even more innovative. So our approach is rather to say, we have to make sure that digital technologies are used throughout our companies, all industries, is used for research, cutting-edge research all over Europe, that we create the best green tech solutions because we are able to extract value from data and analyze it with the help of AI. We are trying to improve health services by creating European health data spaces, and again, provide this data to our, let's say now, pharmaceutical industries to come up with even better solutions, right? So it's a slightly different approach than to say, let's try to have also GAFAM ourselves, yeah? It is rather, what does it take for us to be able to extract the most value of our data economy, which is no longer just a personal data economy that made big tech so big.
Okay, so let us move from software to kind of hardware stuff, where we talk about computational capabilities and all this impact, rapid growth of AI, various models, and including military industry. You had this, you've been interviewed by Alexander Destrel some time ago on your book, and you have addressed this issue. So I wonder how important this hardware. You mentioned already this, that there are many corners in this digital labyrinth where Europe, I would say, is still in the global trendsetter. And thus, somehow, I infer from what you have said that it's better, rather than trying to help something where we are running behind, it would be important to focus on the industries, particularly on those industries which are really, really existential, and help them to mature and to increase their presence and to meet the requirements of the 21st century, whatever.
I mean, this question reminds me of a course I was following at university when I studied economics and business administration decades ago. And a professor at the time said, sort of from a business strategy point of view, you've got to focus on your strong things. Otherwise, you are average everywhere, right? If you just try to plug sort of the things where you're not so good at and invest all your resources into being not bad anywhere, you're also not good anywhere, right? With one exception, however, and that I still remember until today, that of course, if there are threats that may, if you're really weak in one area and that may threaten the rest of your operations, then of course you need to invest in this weakness as well, but otherwise focus on your strengths. And I think that is what we are doing. So of course, yeah, we are focusing on our strengths and our industrial fabric. We are focusing on our strength in terms of research and development. We have fantastic research and R&D in Europe. We're just lousy at bringing that stuff to the market. Yeah, we are very strong in areas like robotics, for instance. Yeah, so not on the platforms, but robotics technologies as well. We are good when it comes to computing power. We have been able to create a structure of supercomputers in Europe in a couple of years, which is now the strongest in the world. We have a network of 9, 10, soon 15 supercomputers in Europe, where member states collectively invest and use those computing capabilities that did not exist 5 years ago. We're very strong at this. So what are we now trying to do? We're now saying, okay, let's build on that and link to AI. We are now trying to bring this to our startups, for instance. Yeah, we say we have now first-class computing power that we will make available to promising startups in Europe. We will also make sure that our data spaces are linked to this. We make sure that they get advice on algorithms, that they get help in terms of digital skills. So we are trying to create ecosystems in the AI race, if you want, but building on our strength, right? Now, just one final word, speaking about weaknesses. AI is, of course, and generative AI and large language models is a problem at the moment, because that is likely to be the next bottleneck, if you want. Now, it's in a few years' time, there will just be a few big model providers left that really have the most powerful models in the world, on which, once again, the rest of the economy will depend. We have seen this in the first wave of digitization, obviously, with the traditional GAFAM, and that they became the marketplaces and the unavoidable trading partners for the rest of the economy. But now, of course, these very same companies largely also have this advance now in providing the best generative AI models. And as you know, there's hardly any business out there anymore or administration that not somehow will integrate this technology in their operations. Now, if that is the next gatekeeper situation, we are, of course, in trouble. Yeah. So this is one weakness where we are focusing on, say, okay, what does it take now? Either use competition law, right? There will be one aspect in the next mandate. If you see sort of those developments of market power across the whole value chain, the AI value chain, where do we need to watch out that we don't have the next dominant abuses of dominant positions? While at the same time, of course, seeing, okay, what can we do in Europe, in this case, ourselves, to develop models that also suit us? Because probably we don't need to copy OpenAI. Probably don't need a general broad model like this. Would be nice to have. Yeah? And probably Mistral in France will manage to pull this off. But probably we need something else. Probably we need, and we're working on this, large language models that focus on European languages that are not so well covered by the existing global models, right? They're all trained in English, of course, and a few other big languages. But now try to do this in Finnish and in Greek and in other languages, and the AI will be much less powerful. But this is our languages. This is where our economy is. So probably we need also to focus here on still developing our own technologies in a way, however, that suits our needs.
And if you look at the wars between the largest AI, or the largest digital players, they even recently start declaring this war almost openly against each other. So it's kind of horizontal clashes, inter-platform competition. Should Europe or any polity in a kind of more cynical way try to operationalize these wars and to somehow to see what can be extracted what benefits Europe itself could generate out of this conflict by permitting some of those stakeholders to, or encouraging them perhaps to do things in a more European, Renaissance, human-centered way, or something of this kind?
Wait a minute. First of all, competition is always good. You will not be surprised to hear this from me working for Margrethe Vestager. And even her advisors 5 years ago, when they wrote a report for her, they referred to the importance of competition in markets and between markets. So how much competition is there in the universe of Google, but then how much competition is there between Google and other platforms or services? And of course, both areas of competition are beneficial, right? So, and if, I don't know, if OpenAI all of a sudden goes into the search market, well, then there's at least some competition for Google search, yeah? So there's nothing wrong about that. On the contrary, could we now, as you say, could we now even, I don't know, promote this further, or encourage this further, incentivize this further?
Tempera.
Sorry? Yeah, I don't think.
Divide tempera.
Well, we do it through our regulation. I mean, that's our own instrument that we have, right? Because there's no point of us going to Silicon Valley and whisper into their ears and say, "Whoa, wouldn't it be great if you do this, that, or the other?" So in a way, we are providing the guardrails once again, that whoever competes in the digital world, on the one hand, in this case, has to follow the AI rules and the trustworthy development of AI systems, while at the same time respecting the Digital Markets Act. I mean, these are guardrails coming from two different directions, right? The one is open and contestable markets and fair competition. The other is trustworthy technologies. So probably we are ring fencing a bit the field of competition, at least as far as its impact on Europe is concerned. What they do purely on their national markets outside Europe, there we have no influence, right? But once again, if European business steps in and says, okay, now we see an opportunity to do this in the European way, but this is something where policy stops and business starts, right? We can provide incentives and frameworks and encouragement and a bit of financial support and a bit of access to computing power. But at the end of the day, you need business spirit, entrepreneurship, risk taking. You need capital markets that function. So that is something that is often overlooked. People are saying, well, Europe is lagging behind because it's over-regulated or this, that, or the other. But first of all, we're lagging behind because we have 27 still different jurisdictions and languages and what have you. Always a problem with the single market that was never as single as it should be. But lack of risk capital. We have fantastic startups. I said we have fantastic research, which is true. We also have fantastic startups all the time coming out of Europe. But many of them at some stage need to turn to the US for venture capital. They can't find this here. So there are a couple of things that need to change, which are beyond our, smart regulatory incentives.
In this context, before moving to Draghi and letter reports, an observation from what I hear often from my peers, it's a little bit, subjective and a convenient position, saying, getting some large funds from the European Union these days, it's a 24/7 job. You have to be an expert in generating, in using this vocabulary and passing through all the labyrinths of succeeding in this endeavor. And then once you succeed and you've been noticed by the venture capital, they take you and hoover up it to other jurisdictions within this kind of critical mass where the new law of gravitation, more effective commercially, exists. It's a stereotype, but I hear that there are some visions about kind of trying to fine tune or improve the way how European funds will be redistributed among different sectors. Is there anything you can say quickly on this, or it's a separate topic which requires nuanced conversation?
No, it is, as I said before, everything is related to everything. Yeah, and it's true, of course, accessing European funds is a very complicated undertaking. Already at the European level, because we have many different funding programs, and either you get money from research, or you get it from this spending program, or from cohesion policy, or from any other pots. So really navigate sort of between all different funding opportunities. Let's say linked to AI, you would probably find funding possibilities under 5, 6, 7, 8 different European programs. You would also find them then at member state level, of course. So if you are this business operator with a smart idea, you may indeed need 3 advisors that guide you through this maze. Yeah, and that is certainly one strand that we are thinking about for the next generation of our financial programs, the ones that we control at European level. A major simplification. So in the next multi-annual financial program, it's still under elaboration, and then it needs to be negotiated. But it's the core line will be, how can we simplify, make it easier to access those funds, also in admin term, but not just in admin term, but also conceptually, right? That it's much clearer what are the priorities, what are the European policy priorities, what are the funding possibilities, how do I get to those funds? All of that will be and needs to be much simpler. But I would still add here, if I may, that this is still a drop in the ocean if you think about the capital that is actually needed for real breakthrough innovations, right? If you look, coming back last time to the large language models, right? If you know how much money Microsoft has poured into OpenAI to make them viable, I think we're talking in the realms of, I don't know, $13 billion or whatever. This goes beyond every fund we have ever set up in Europe for such things, right? So at some stage, you need big money. You may start things with our funding, you know, but then it needs the market needs to come in and take over, and that is a big weakness still.
That's very convincing. Let us move to the Letta and Draghi reports. They've been obviously, because they are quite wide documents, and they've been cherry-picked by different stakeholders and interpreted in very creative way. How do you read this document?
As you have quite said yourself, you can read many things into those documents, because especially the Draghi report is very, very long, very extensive. So, and you can, wherever you are coming from, you will find something that you like. But overall, I would still say we are pretty much on the same page. And if I say we, then I mean Letta, Draghi, von der Leyen. If you read her political guidelines for the new commission, there's lots of references to Draghi in particular, but also Letta. If you have follow discussions in the Council of Ministers, when they discuss those reports, and Draghi in particular, it reads, if you read the minutes of those meetings, they read highly consensual in a way. Yeah. So in a way, the message is a bit the mainstream message of Europe needs to become more competitive, and assertive and sovereign and resilient, which is, and I'm not being dismissive of this, which is right, but it's almost a no-brainer. Yeah. Of course we need to do this. Yeah. As we discussed up until now, with those shifts in our markets, with the shifts in the geopolitical environment, all the tensions, of course Europe needs to become stronger, more assertive, more independent, to prosper. Now, if you look into the recipes, both of them very much stress the single market, and I couldn't agree more, because this has always been our stronghold, right? That in principle, yeah, because the single market is a terrible animal, you know. You cut off two heads, you know, two obstacles to trade, and five others grow somewhere, because somewhere in Europe new barriers are being erected, probably to protect some national champions or whatever. So it's a constant. It's like in your garden, you know, the grass would keep growing, and it's not enough just to have, you know, you have to go every day, you know, every week, sort of, to make sure that it stays in shape. Now, that's one thing. And then, of course, they say particular areas. Yeah, we need it in energy, we need it in telecom, we need it in more on also defense, and the link between military and civil applications. So there's a lot of areas, I think, where there's wide agreement. They would, of course, also say we need to cut back on bureaucracy and administrative burden and so on, which is also obvious in a way. Of course, this is necessary. Yeah, we did regulate in the past. We will probably regulate in the future, but less so. But of course, that always is part of the single market, that the legal framework stays as slim as it possibly can. But other than that, I have not seen anything in those reports where I would say, oh my God, where are they taking us? You know, I think we're jointly going in the same direction.
Okay, so let us pause here on the broader geo things, because you have highlighted very eloquently and in very openly so many important things to process in the future. And I wanted to ask you about the DMA. More historical questions. It's probably too early. Things are evolving so quickly that drafting this document or coming up to this idea, we know the traditional narrative of how this text has emerged, that the process becomes too cryptic, and the traditional 102 abuse of dominance cases become too long in terms of investigation. The evidentiary burden becomes insurmountable. It's getting more and more technical, and there are so many procedural pitfalls, times runs quick, etc. Plus more holistic text. So we know the story, but from the socio kind of observational perspective, you have to come up with this document, which is very harmonious piece, and very original, innovative, proactive piece, underpinned by different reports. Fuhrman report, I remember this years of reports. but somebody has to draft it. We still don't know the heroes. Is it too early in this history to unravel the drafters, people who have created this text and who have how the babies are made, so to say? How did you discuss
Mhm.
different aspects of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. First of all, before going into any detail, for me, that's part of the paradigm shift because I mentioned this word before. Um, Paradigm shift was not only in terms of us becoming more strategic and holistic in our approach, but also that out there, and I'm now you can't see this and hear this, you can hear it but not see it. When I point to the building of the Council of Ministers on the other side of Plus Schumann, when I look at the European Parliament. 10 years ago, they were not ready for anything like this. Yeah, 5 years ago, when we started with this agenda, including preparations of the Digital Markets Act, time had become ripe for this. Sometimes you need to wait for the right moment that the environment has changed in a way that people see that change is inevitable. And I say this as someone who was actually preparing and negotiating myself the predecessor to the Digital Markets Act, which was the platform to business regulation. So that was the first piece of law where we looked into the platform economy, not really from a market power point of view, not really the DG competition type of lens, but still we used pretty similar concepts. Yeah, we said it was for business users of platforms. Yeah, we said, oh my God, there's this dependency relationship. We didn't use market power, let alone abuse of market power, but we said, hang on, if you are a small hotel, you need to be on Booking.com, you need to be on Expedia, you need to be on 2 or 3 platforms. They've become almost unavoidable trading partners for you, but there's an imbalance in market power, obviously, an imbalance, and therefore we were trying to rectify a few things, but very mild, very transparency-based measures. You know, thou shalt be open about the way in which you treat your business customers, and even that proposal, as modest as it was running into big opposition in the council. Since I was the one who negotiated it, I know that, yeah. Half of Europe, basically the north and east and center, said, oh, are you really sure we need to regulate digital markets? If there are problems, the markets will sort it out. You know, let market mechanisms do the job. The South already was much more willing to go forward and say, yeah, but you're even too modest with your transparency-related measures because big tech is so strong. So it was a huge battle, and the outcome was a transparency-based instrument, right? Parliament had already been much more open to this at the time, but it didn't change the balance. Now, just 3 years later, when we started this mandate, uh, also the skeptical member states had watched how markets had further developed. You had to be blind not to see that with every year, the market power yielded by big tech had become stronger and had strangled lots of their own companies, not just in Europe, but globally, right? So in that sense, it was pretty easy in a way politically to work on a DMA. The question was then just how to do that. And there, of course, I mean, the heroes go back years of competition law cases. Of course, in the last mandate, when Margrethe Vestager was already competition commissioner, as you know, as everybody knows, she launched the first big tech cases. So a lot of knowledge was built up during that time, right? So on the one hand, knowledge and understanding of the practices of big tech. So what is it that they do that is so anti-competitive? Yeah, what do they do that forecloses competition in those markets? At the same time, of course, we all saw the shortcomings, and you mentioned all of them in your question. Now, this is too slow and it comes too late, and it's hard to prove. But the most compelling argument probably is by the time you have concluded a case, uh, thousands of companies have gone south already because they will not survive 3, 4, 5 years until a case is mature. Yeah. So this general perception of the problems getting bigger every day, with sort of the acknowledgement that the existing toolkit was not sufficient to do this, combined with the technical understanding and the expertise to actually be able to put the finger on where change is needed, all of that culminated in the DMA, right? So because if you do read, and everybody does, and you in particular, I mean, all these prohibitions and obligations can be traced back to cases, right? So in that sense, ex post competition law fed directly the ex ante law that we have created, right? So, but rather than having to prove one by one ex post, we said, okay, if we define now ex ante what dominance means without using that term, and then you just can't do this stuff anymore. That was just the most elegant solution. And when we took this proposal and walked over to Parliament and Council, they all loved it, which is quite amazing because it was, in legal terms and economic terms, such a big move, because this is changing the business models of big tech, right? If you take the Digital Services Act, that it makes them act more responsibly, that may increase compliance cost and other things, you know. But the DMA goes to the heart of the matter. You are not allowed to use your dominant position in any way you see fit. And yet, time was ripe for European democratic institutions to say, okay, we take it on, we do this. And this was, as you know, adopted in record time.
And I fully acknowledge everything you said, and I subscribe to everything you said wholeheartedly. Implying, however, that the DMA has several visions and several ways or several strategies to be interpreted, so to say. And I fully subscribe to the one which let us focus on making these big tech designated gatekeepers to comply. Almost the more the better, and by imposing such heavy regulatory burden and level of accountability, we apropos simultaneously open up the markets and increase the opportunities for newcomers. But assuming that there are several visions about the DMA, leaving aside the mainstream and leaving aside those which are critical, there I imagine there must be some in the pilot cabin who've been even more ambitious in seeing the DMA as a kind of in the recording studio. It's not like on-off position. You have, by interpreting proactively or by emphasizing on specific, by focusing on specific obligation, you become a co-creator of new digital order. If things would be so easy, so to say, but I imagine every step requires resources, vision, etc. But structurally speaking, a more proactive enforcement of the DMA can contribute to shaping the parameters of the digital markets. Does this camp exist, or it's just in the heads of some very enthusiastic academics?
No, this is definitely here, and the DMA as such definitely has this potential. And I'm also saying this in a way that the DSA is quite a flexible and open instrument. As much as it is clear on who is in scope and what the obligations are, as you rightly said, you can interpret each and every paragraph more forcefully or less forcefully, because that is linked a bit to the need for it to be prescriptive on the one hand, but flexible on the other. Because if you're overly descriptive in this piece of law, it is outdated tomorrow, right? If we had spelled out in great detail what exactly is forbidden or allowed, you know, then it could be circumvented easily, because then the next gatekeeper does it slightly differently and is no longer captured by this, or it is just outdated tomorrow because completely new practice will come in, right? So we had a bit to square the circle in providing the legal certainty for everyone of who and what and when, while at the same time allowing it to be adapted to real life. Take just one example. Yeah, if you say self-preferencing is not allowed, right? It's a very generic observation. Of course, it very much depends on the business models and the companies concerned, the gatekeepers concerned, what in their context this actually means. So it is not just a law like any other that, you know, e-commerce, consumer protection law, you have 2 weeks to return your goods. I mean, it's an easy rule. Everybody knows what it means, and you comply, you don't comply. Yeah. But if you say it was thou shalt not self-preference, of course, this means something else on Google search than it means on Facebook or on booking.com or elsewhere. So, and therefore, if you follow the last year of implementation and enforcement, there is, of course, a lot of regulatory dialogue going on. to clarify expectations, it's much faster, of course, than a competition law case, if you want, right? That takes probably 5 years. Now it just takes us 1 year in a way to determine gatekeeper by gatekeeper and service by service what compliance means. But it is a dialogue, right? It's a dialogue with the gatekeepers where they, of course, try to show how they will comply, and we challenge them, they offer something else. But it is also double checking with the economy out there and the other market participants, right? So therefore, you have then all sorts of workshops where you're sort of testing the commitments proposed by the gatekeepers to the rest of the economy. And that once again shows that it's not just a question of how strongly you enforce, but you can enforce in very different ways, because the same commitment may be good for stakeholder A, but it's less good for stakeholder B. So if Google proposes some changes, for Google Shopping or this, that, or the other, then some part of those concerned will say, yeah, that benefits me. And another part will say, no, for me, it's even worse. So where is then the correct implementation of that provision, right? So all that to say that by nature, the DMA leaves room open for different ways of enforcement. But I think one thing is clear, we want to enforce it to the fullest. And on this, we are not alone. If you look globally, all the discussions from the US to many other jurisdictions, many are looking at Europe in awe in a way and say, oh my God, we would love to have that instrument because it's spot on. That is what is needed. So I think also other jurisdictions are probably a bit hoping for spillover effects, which probably may be difficult to see, because as we have already seen, platforms would then rather say, okay, for the bloody Europeans, we will not do this anymore, but we will still do it in South America.
And in this model or regulatory model, what's the role of merger control and structural remedies? Because we more and more often hear in digital cases in the United States in particular that structural remedies can become even separation of big tech companies can become not only just a nuclear option, but something which will in one form or another be invoked by judges, and thus merger control as well, more generally. How important it is to prevent this power to emerge in the first place, or it's a little bit too reactionary.
Of course, if you read the DMA, then you also see sort of the enforcement tools of the DMA itself. Yeah, so the first part really is not about breaking up big tech or anything. It is just to make sure that the various prohibitions are being respected. And it's not a real breaking up, but still, of course, one of the ideas is that they do not combine different services in a way they have done in the past. Yeah, so we're not saying you have got to sell this part of your service, but you are saying you cannot just take data from here and put them there, right? Now, of course, if at some stage in the enforcement process, we have exhausted all means and they still have not changed behavior in the way that they are expected to, or if they make commitments and don't comply by their own commitments, then of course you go further down the line and you will even have the nuclear options that you refer to. But it's not the starting point, right? Whereas, I mean, as I said, it's also other tools, whether it's the merger regulation or whether it's still also the application of traditional competition law. We have not buried the idea of using antitrust in digital cases, right? So the two tools coexist. Of course, the DMA will probably make it less frequent and less needed in the future to use the competition law toolkit, but it's still there. Yeah. So we just have to juggle with the instruments that we have and respond accordingly.
Yes. The next question, moving to the end of our conversation, Europe is known for its, among other things, for its Brussels effect, at least, metaphorically speaking, that it is a pioneer in designing sophisticated, very up-to-date, future-proof regulatory landscape. But do you search for inspiration in some other jurisdictions occasionally? Do you see some interesting models, approaches, philosophies elsewhere in this multipolar world these days?
Well, probably less so in the digital sphere, because there we are really, I mean, we have always been the front runners in terms of regulation. I worked in other sectors before in the commission, you know, in the non-digital sectors. And then when we prepared some laws and did our impact assessments, of course, it was always one thing was what have other jurisdictions done, and you compare a bit the regulatory models and you try to learn from each other. But in starting from the GDPR up to the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, the Data Act, Data Governance Act, AI Act, none of this has found an equivalent out there. There was no other model to compare this with, right? And it's not that we said, we didn't go out and or we didn't say, sit in our offices and say, now let's create another Brussels effect. You know, it's great to be the first. That was never the point. Yeah. It was not in order to create a Brussels effect, but the Brussels effect always came as a result, and mainly because other jurisdictions do face the same problems. So we are not, thank God, we have not been paranoid in a way, you know. We're not the only ones that say, but hang on, AI can also be dangerous, you know, the rest of the world is laughing at us. At the very latest, when ChatGPT came out, all of a sudden, I think 40 to 50 jurisdictions globally were starting to do impact assessments or look into ways to regulate AI. And then they were turning to us again because we had 2 years of advance already at that time and had done our homework and analysis and so on. You know, and then they turned to us and said, okay, can we have a discussion on what you have identified and how you try to do things? Yeah. So in that sense, others are following us. For us, I can't see anybody. We're not going to copy the Chinese law on AI. Yeah. And other than that, I see more followers, globally speaking, than front runners.
Okay, moving to the end of this really exciting, informative conversation, for me at least, I wonder how the academics, we know that the Commission is open to academic research and you engage with academics on continuous basis. And there is no universal recommendation, of course. But overall, do you expect from academics offering you more technical, more refined, more nuanced analysis of something which you're already interested in, or you would be rather looking at them as those who do future-proof ideas, just hypothesizing and trying to do these experiments, not being motivated by, you know, by just their natural intellectual instincts.
Well, I would say first and foremost, and it's a personal statement. Yeah, I'm not aware of a commission position on how we see the academic world. So my personal instinct is, if I turn to academia, I want independent research. That is the main criterion, because there's so many people are talking about so many things, and you get studies here and studies there, and something financed by big tech and somewhere else. You always have to double check 5 times who was actually paying for this, and is it not, you know, if you turn around the corner 3 times, you may be running into big tech again that claim that this and that would have dramatic effects if stupid regulators were going that way. So that is my first and foremost wish towards the academic world, to do really independent work on issues that are controversial and that are important for society. Now, it depends certainly on the area as well. And in some areas, there's limits to what you can do. When I was head of unit for postal services, I did not need to talk to academics all the time about what they thought about postal policy. You know, it was not such a difficult environment to understand that you really needed a lot of academic research. When we started to discuss large language models and generative AI and how to regulate that, academia was extremely useful source for us, because as you remember, we had 1.5 years probably from the emergence of those models to the finalization of the negotiations of the AI Act. And we were collectively wondering, and I mean Commission, Council, and Parliament, collectively wondering how to regulate this. And in order to regulate this, you need to understand this, and to understand what are the risks linked to generative AI, let's say. If you're only talking to stakeholders, they will, of course, tell you what they want to tell you and what they need for their own business models. Or you talk to civil society, and it's not wrong what they're saying, but they would just want to avoid this because this is coming from, you know, devilish stuff, and we don't want this. So we needed, and we found in academia people that really helped us with the analysis of the risks, for instance. Yeah? So very much topic by topic, but I would always and will always value high quality independent research in the public interest.
Last question before inviting you to provide a recommendation to students, those who will be playing this game in 10, 20 years time. And please feel free not to answer because it's a delicate kind of, or it's a little bit unpleasant to comment on the thing. But what's next? How should we expect a continuity or refocusing on something, some specific aspects of this digital policy, European digital policy?
But first of all, I don't expect major new laws. There may be a bit of filling the gaps here and there because the world doesn't stand still. But overall, I think we have created a very comprehensive framework that in itself is also quite flexible. We discussed already the DMA, where we said it can be adapted. The DSA is also very flexible because it speaks about systemic risks. And if systemic risks change, they're still covered by the law. We have done the same with the AI Act, which is pretty principles-based and the linking to codes of conduct. So if risks were to change in the AI world, all that is needed actually would be to update a code of conduct, which we then sort of validate as lawmakers. So we don't have to change the law. So what I'm saying is, for major digital areas, we have a framework that is both comprehensive and flexible. Now, what definitely one priority is to make this framework work. And that's a very boring statement usually. And normally new commission coming in doesn't want to say we're going to implement what the previous commission has done, right? These guys are politicians. Of course, they want to leave a footprint. But I think in this case, it's different. First of all, we have the same president. So the commission president that has launched all of this is also the commission president as we take it forward. So for her, it's much easier to say, listen, guys, this was so important what we have done. We have to make this work. So it's still part of her legacy. So I'm not afraid of a paradigm shift again because new bright minds say we need something totally different, right? And this is not just enforcement related, but this is implementation and compliance related. And that links it actually to more the industrial policy part of it. If we must make this framework work for everybody concerned. So it's not just tick box, someone complies, but because if one respects the rules, that opens possibilities for someone else, as we discussed for the DMA. If you enforce the DMA correctly, then you give greater market opportunities to potential competitors. If you enforce the DSA and make sure that less illegal products are being imported from China, that benefits correct traders in Europe or elsewhere that respect the rules and the laws. Yeah. So, or also just to bring technology into our companies, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, is also one of the priorities of the next von der Leyen Commission. She calls it digital tech diffusion. Make sure that now that we have created the framework conditions, the guardrails for the responsible use of technology, we bring this technology to companies, to industrial sectors, to research, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So in that sense, I see a lot of continuity, but building on top of it, right? Taking it to the next level and make sure that we have not just regulated tech, but we make sure that tech is actually being integrated, used, and further developed in Europe.
Okay, and finally, the question about your recommendation to those who are already much more digitally equipped, technologically much more savvy, they live and breathe digitally 24/7. Then they are now training their regulatory skills, learning law, economics, data science, whatever the area which would be relevant for the future. How should they prepare themselves, the students? Is there any feature which you sense would be they have to train with particular attention, or maybe some elements, some personal features or some technical features, competences?
Oh my God, that's a complicated, difficult question. First of all, I would say it's very important not to fall into any silos. Because in the good old days, or not so good old days, you studied one thing and that became your stronghold, right? And I'm an economist and you were a lawyer and you were a doctor and you're this, that, and the other. We all acquired our expertise somewhere and then we worked in this for the rest of our lives. First of all, there is no lifelong jobs anymore, and the nature of jobs will change. But also the world has become more interconnected, and that comes through digital. So digital is such a transversal technology that affects all sectors and all professions of the economy. So, and then I think students should realize that they need to take one step back and look at their line of trade, at their line of studies in a much more open and holistic way, and look for the connections to other areas, right? Because we have, for instance, when we say we need digital skills, so the obvious thing would be to tell students, well, you know, become a data scientist or an AI expert, and you will for sure have a job until the end of your life, which is probably true. But also, if you want to go into farming or into healthcare or into any other area of our economy and society, digital will follow you. And the use, for instance, of data and creation and use of data, the use of generative AI and other AI tools will be important for the farmer when it's about precision farming and how to optimize the use of fertilizers and at which point of the year and which crops to plant. That's no longer the instinct of the farmer, you know, generation to generation. It is technology going there. If you become a journalist, you better had learned how to deal with AI to improve your work. It will not replace you, but you need to be able to use AI in your work so that you produce better articles as a journalist. If you become a teacher, you had better understand the digital world, not only to teach your students and children how to navigate in the digital world, but also again how to improve your own performance as a teacher, making optimum use of technology. So that is my main recommendation probably. Take a holistic view, make sure that your skill set is as broad as possible. Watch out left, right, and center. Anyway, that's my main recommendation.
Werner Stengg, thank you very much indeed for this very informative, very insightful conversation.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.